We're on episode 2 of the Perimenopause series, and today we're going to talk about why carbs start feeling and hitting your body so differently as you transition into this phase of our life. So last episode, we talked about where fat is going during perimenopause and that we're getting this shift to that belly fat and that we can't just rely on the scale now because it's not really telling us some of the more dangerous changes that might be happening to our body. Today, we're going to be diving into the engine room because underneath that fat distribution, underneath the stubborn midsection, underneath the feeling that, hey, my body just isn't responding the way that it's used to, it's supposed to, there's a hormone change that's impacting all of that, and that is insulin resistance. And perimenopause doesn't just increase our risk for it, it's going to actively create the conditions for it, which means that this old advice, eat less, move more, isn't just unhelpful, but it's not actually solving the root cause and why we're experiencing so many of these frustrating symptoms. So what does insulin resistance actually mean? Insulin is this hormone that's going to move glucose, or sugars, from our bloodstream into our cells to be used for energy. And so when everything is working well, your cells are going to respond really efficiently. Insulin's going to knock, the door gets open, glucose gets in, energy is made, you now have energy. Insulin resistance is what happens when the cell stops responding properly. So you're getting that knock, the door's not opening easy. So your body's going to produce more insulin. It's knocking louder to get that job done, and more and louder and louder. And so the whole system starts to strain. And then the result is we get a higher fasting insulin and you get more fat storage signaling. You have more glucose sitting in your bloodstream longer than it should, and that makes your body so inefficient at burning this fat for fuel. So why does perimenopause create the perfect storm and condition for this? Now, that SWAN study that we talked about in the last episode tracked insulin resistant markers across this menopausal transition, and they found that a clinical measure of insulin resistance is actually rising during perimenopause, even when the researchers were controlling for age, weight, and lifestyle. So this proves to us that a 42-year-old woman in perimenopause is metabolically different than a 42-year-old woman who is not in perimenopause. She might be the same age, the same weight, the same lifestyle, but hormonal conditions and her metabolic reality is vastly different. So what is driving this change? And it's not just one thing, but it's a cascade of events. It's a train wreck. So we've got this estrogen decline. That's the starting point. Estrogen is not just a reproductive hormone. It's deeply metabolic. It's supporting how your muscles take up glucose, how efficiently your body and your mitochondria work, how well your insulin receptors signal. And as estrogen starts fluctuating and falling, muscle becomes less sensitive to insulin. Glucose gets cleared less efficiently and your body compensates by producing more insulin. And that chronically elevated insulin is that fat storage signal. Now, the visceral fat makes it way worse. And in episode 1, we talked directly about that we're getting that visceral fat accumulating around your organs. It is inflammatory. And this is going to directly worsen insulin signaling because it's pumping these free fatty acids into your liver. The fat redistribution and the insulin resistance are not separate problems. They're like feeding each other and creating this perfect storm that's going on in our body. Now, we also have cortisol piling on. So in perimenopause, we get a decline of progesterone. It's destabilizing the entire stress response. And the result of this is many women are experiencing a higher evening cortisol, more stress reactivity, and a nervous system that's running way hotter than it used to. When we've got this chronically elevated cortisol, it's going to affect blood sugar. It's going to promote even more fat storage and blunt insulin sensitivity even further. So we've got a direct metabolic problem here because we're just more sensitive to cortisol, and that sensitivity is fueling all these other changes. And then there's sleep. And so we touched on this on the last episode. I'm going to have an episode that goes even deeper here. But when we have short-term sleep disruption, it's going to reduce insulin sensitivity by like 20 to 30%. And we know in perimenopause, we are getting chronically disrupting sleep from cortisol, from hot flashes, from other symptoms, and just that glucose regulation. So it's all adding up. Now, what this feels like, and this is where the research stops being so abstract and really starts sounding exactly what the women are describing in my world every single day and you're going to your doctor sharing these symptoms, but we're not getting any results. We're eating the same. We're gaining weight. Carbs are hitting way different than they used to. You're looking at bread and feeling like you just gained 5 pounds. Your energy is unstable. You are gaining weight into that stomach specifically. These are not random symptoms. These are hallmark signs of this insulin resistance that's creating this metabolic inflexibility. Your body is losing the ability to smoothly transition between burning the sugar and burning the fat. Now, here's the thing that makes women furious and so frustrating. Your labs might look completely normal. So when we have that standard fasting glucose on our lab work, it can appear fine when insulin resistance is well underway. A lot of these blood markers are late markers. It's one of the last things to shift. So you might be looking at these numbers and saying, oh, your glucose is fine. You don't have any problems, but you've been metabolically dysregulated for a while. So this is why so many women describe doing everything right? You're getting the blood work, you're going to your doctor, you're being told everything looks fine. They might even say, oh, well, you're not yet into menopause, but the markers being tested aren't always the right ones for catching this early. It's like with cortisol, they'll test one level throughout the day, but we need to know what your cortisol levels are doing in the morning, midday, evening, and overnight. So what's actually moving the needle here? So let's get practical. Let's talk about what we should actually be doing to fix this, because we don't have to be bound by these symptoms. Protein first, 20 to 30 grams of quality protein per meal, starting your day with a protein forward, low carb breakfast, whether it's eggs with vegetables, a protein source like lean ground beef, salmon, chicken, things that you don't normally think of as breakfast. It's going to be a game changer. That was actually one of the first moves I made on my fat loss journey in my early 20s. Late 20s was to not be eating breakfast foods like the toast, the peanut butter, the oatmeal, and start eating things that I would generally consider dinner or lunch foods. And it changed how my body responded for the rest of the day. Protein is going to directly improve your insulin response. It's going to reduce the glucose spikes that we're having that become more pronounced as your estrogen is fluctuating. Now, we also want to be very strategic around carbs. We don't have to do an elimination. We don't have to do a keto approach, but it's understanding that your muscles are most insulin sensitive around physical activity. So timing carbs around training or when you're doing more exertion, always pairing them with a protein and an anti-inflammatory fat, and then choosing low glycemic style carbs, starchy vegetables, quinoa, lentils. It means that your body is going to handle them very differently than it would like a refined carb. So white bread is going to be dealt with very, very different. And then we also want to stop grazing. So when we're frequently snacking throughout the day, this is going to keep insulin chronically elevated, and allowing these gaps between meals gives our baseline insulin a chance to drop. One of the simplest, most underrated shifts that you can make. And then you want to walk after you eat 10 minutes. That is it, because the muscle contraction after a meal is going to pull glucose from the bloodstream without requiring large amounts of insulin. So it's one of the most effective and accessible tools that we have for improving insulin sensitivity. Not a lot of people do it. Even just doing a set of squats or calf raises after a meal is going to make a huge difference. Now, fiber matters way more than you think. 25, 35 grams daily. Beans, chia, berries. This is going to slow glucose absorption down. And of course, resistance training remains one of the most powerful long-term levers for women in perimenopause. It's going to increase the receptors in the muscle that pull glucose in. It's going to improve glucose disposal after meals. Nothing else has the same long-term impact on insulin sensitivity. And this keeps coming up because it keeps being true. We see it in the research all the time. We want to make sure that we are building and maintaining muscle mass. Now, a little side note about hormone replacement therapy. Now, we do know that hormone replacement therapy will significantly reduce insulin resistance in menopause women. It tends to be more of a weight neutral, not necessarily helping you lose weight, but can help support the hormones that help you lose weight. Insulin resistance in perimenopause is driven by a specific set of hormonal and physiological changes that are happening, and those changes respond to very specific interventions. So the women who struggle the most in this phase are usually the ones using this strategy built for a completely different metabolic reality. This is why we do what we do, because we can go so much deeper into calories or just doing more cardio. We're working with what's actually happening in the body right now and building a strategy around that. If you are finding yourself into that perimenopausal phase, give yourself that grace and compassion. Your changes are happening. You're not doing anything, quote, wrong, but we want to make sure that we're doing the right things for the hormonal environment that you are now in. If you want support navigating this, I'll make sure to leave a link in the show notes to book an assessment call, and we'll figure out what's going on for you specifically. Next episode, we are diving into one of my favorite topics. It is cortisol, because the stress in perimenopause, it's not just a mood problem, it's a fat storage problem, and most women have no idea how deep this connection goes. See you there.